Hello there, and welcome to your session in During Confetti Week with Neil Oseman. Who is going to be talking to us today about cinematography in feature films, short films, and using his web series. Please use the chat function to ask any questions, and we'll aim to ask as many as we can. We're going to have a backlog of all these Q&A stuff to get all things sorted out for you. We hope you enjoyed today's session, and have a massive thank you as well to Neil, who's given the time to join us today on the 15th Confetti Industry Week. Do not forget that there's still plenty of other sessions to join up to. So if you are, can you please go up to the sessions by booking them on the official Industry Week website at iw.confetti.ac.uk. Please be sure you use your Confetti or your NTU address when you are signing up to other future sessions. As part of Industry Week, we're also running a competition where you can win up to some really cool prizes. So all you can do is tag us on Twitter or Instagram with the hashtag IW21, sharing your experiences throughout the whole week. Now, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce to you all to Neil Oseman. So thank you very much for joining us, and it's a pleasure to have you on.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is someone you've been someone we've been trying to get for a little while actually, because you are I've seen a lot of your work as a cinematographer. It's quite a lot of it's very unique, and and also as well is that you do a lot of this stuff already. Technically, you teach a lot of this stuff already, like through like your Instagram and stuff like that as well. So I'm actually it'd be really nice to for you guys to share that with the rest of the students. So let's break things down a bit. So first of all, would you like to properly introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Neil Oseman. I'm a director of photography. I've done a few other things in the past as well. I used to direct and produce a little bit my own stuff, and I've done quite a bit of editing as well. But for the last 5 or 6 years, really, cinematography is what I've been doing.
Brilliant. So you're basically doing a little bit of everything now. So my thing now is to basically say, I know you have some wonderful slides you're willing to share as we go through all that together. But I kind of want to ask, like, the start of your journey. So how did you start and getting into the field of media, filmmaking, and leading up to being a cinematographer?
So I was a teenager in the 90s, and my granddad had a camcorder, just a standard definition analog camcorder, tape camcorder. And I used to borrow that. And eventually he got fed up of me borrowing it and just gave it to me for one birthday, because I was using it far more than he was.
Yeah.
And between the ages of probably like 14 and 18, I must have made 50 or 60 amateur films of varying lengths. One or two of them were feature length, many short ones as well. I would just rope in my school friends. We would film in back gardens, make props out of Lego and cardboard boxes. And a lot of them were kind of comedy, Monty Python type things, or spoofs. Some of them we tried to take more seriously, or I did anyway. Often my mates weren't quite so interested in those ones, but I've actually got a few photos here, which I can...
Wonderful, can't wait to see them.
And share. So yeah, that was my Sanyo camcorder, and those are some pictures from The Dark Side of the Earth, which was a Star Wars ripoff that I made when I was about 15 or 16, and the guy with the microphone is just doing like a fake interview thing. We used to have all kinds of stuff, like we'd do outtakes, people falling in ponds and things, and then the lead actor would come on with a mic and pretend to be a reporter reporting on it. But all kinds of hijinks we got up to. And then I was going to go and study, do a media production course, something like that. And while I was in what I thought was going to be my gap year, I took a short film course, which was sort of 2 weeks of very practical workshops, followed by a week of being an assistant to a professional DP on a short film shoot, a 16mm Super 16 short film shoot. And that was amazing. And if I had any doubts about wanting to be a filmmaker, they were definitely dispelled at that point. And the DP advised me, if you want to get into this industry, degrees don't really mean anything, so you should just start carrying people's bags, making coffees for them, being a runner on set. I think deep down I didn't really want to go to university anyway, if I'm perfectly honest. So that kind of chimed with me. I took the advice, and I basically went freelance at 19. And I was quite lucky that I was living in Hereford in the West Midlands. It's quite a small town, but the company that ran that course was also a production company, and they made corporate videos, and they made what's called participatory films, where you'd workshop a script with a group of young people, and it would usually be funded by the council, and you'd make a drama about issues of teenage pregnancy or alcohol abuse or whatever it was.
So it's like those old school PSAs that you used to.
Yeah, that sort of thing, but a bit more sort of involving the actual young people themselves. But it would be like the crew would be director, producer, camera, sound. You know, literally just four of us. So and I can remember the first time we did one, and the director said, "Oh, the production company's got these lights. Should we bring the lights along? Maybe we'll film some of it at night and we'll just try and light it." And we had no idea what we were doing. I had no idea about motivating light sources or any of that kind of stuff, but we just so it was self-taught really, from just kind of just doing it, but both on the amateur stuff when I was a teenager, and then on these really tiny sort of projects in the West Midlands. And then I started doing, after a couple of years of that, I got on Shooting People and Mandy.com, which are online filmmakers networks which still exist. And I was applying for jobs on there, and doing a lot of short films and some really tiny budget features, most of which were unpaid or very low paid. So I was doing those alongside the corporates and the participatory videos, and that sort of went on for about 15 years, until I did the first project that I'm going to talk about, which is Ren the Girl with a Mark, which started to, it was a bit of a turning point in my career, started to move me towards the more professional drama end of stuff and making a living from that.
So I wanted to ask quickly before we look into Ren. Obviously, you didn't take the education approach to this. You basically went through literally going the hard way, almost like you dropped in deep. So what kind of big obstacles did you have to overcome while you were doing it the hard way? Like, were there moments where you're thinking like, what did you have to learn quickly on set or anything like that? If you didn't have the training before, what did you have to try and overcome? With any problems or anything funny, anything interesting like that?
Oh God, I mean, I think it was just the era of DVDs coming in, and DVD extras were a big thing around that time. You know, the internet was still, you know, there wasn't broadband, so that you couldn't watch a lot of video on the internet, but like DVD extras were the main way of learning from big films at that time. So I remember learning a lot of stuff from those. I remember doing my first paid film job was as a runner on a corporate video, trying to encourage businesses to set up their premises in Herefordshire. And yeah, I can remember things like being asked to set up some lights. I think I must have had a vague idea of how to do it. But I remember gaffer taping the cables down to the floor so people wouldn't trip over them. And that got the director's attention. He thought, oh, okay, you've done that without being told. That's good. That's initiative. So yeah, I think the amateur filmmaking had paid off. And I also remember that I around that time I put together a show reel of my amateur films to show the head of the production company, and she obviously saw some potential in there. I must have developed some basic composition skills even by that point, because she said, oh, okay, you know how to frame a shot. So I actually moved from, like, my first paid job was a runner, my second was a camera assistant, I think my third was actually director on one of these little low budget, because I had quite punk spiky hair at the time, and I think they thought I would be a good director for this participatory video. It's about skateboarders in a town in Worcestershire called Droitwich, and their skate park had been closed down, and I think the council had decided that rather than funding a new skate park, they'd fund a video about why the kids needed a skate park. And I was hired to direct that. And yeah, I remember, I think it might have even been the first day of filming. So we had roller skaters, skateboarders, and BMXers. And one of these BMXers did a stunt where he cycled along a wall outside a Sainsbury's and did a bunny hop off the end, which is where you land on your back wheel.
Yeah.
And he came off his bike and fractured his skull.
Sorry.
That was my first professional directing job. And the guy was all right in the end. He was okay, but because he wasn't wearing a helmet, and it was this weird thing with participatory video. In that kid was doing those bunny hops like every day. That's what he did. But as a director, I had also asked him to do it for the camera. It's like, whose fault is this? It's my production company. Fortunately, it didn't. There were never any legal cases or anything, but could have been quite bad, really. So that was my introduction to directing.
I can imagine then, basically, again, because you've been doing it, this like the amateur approach of all this. Like again, you're learning on set. So if obviously by this point you've learned, for example, like, right, safety is an important thing, for example, we've got to be sure that's working and stuff like that. How from every little mini shoot, did you it's almost like evolve? Did you get like learning little bits and bobs for every shoot, or did you feel like at one point like, yeah, I know what I'm doing now and stuff like that? When did you get to that point where you feel more comfortable in your roles?
Yeah, I think, well, it depends what kind of thing you're working on, because I quickly got quite comfortable on those very small projects, and some of the people that I worked with on those, I'm still good friends with, so it was a bit like hanging out with mates sometimes, so that was quite comfortable. But then I might apply for something on Shooting People, which was a no budget fee. I mean, I think one of the first features I did, which was definitely an unpaid one, was in New York. It was like a British director, and I think there were about 6 of us British crew that flew out to New York it was upstate New York, it wasn't New York City, but for about 3 weeks. And that was my first time going to America as well. And we sort of all lived in this house for 3 weeks and shot this film and never had a day off and worked ridiculous hours, and had amazing fun. So yeah, I don't know, you learn a bit with everything you do. Like I remember doing loads of corporate training videos about like how to prevent money laundering in banks and things, and at every interview that I would shoot, I would try putting the lights in a different place just to see what effect it had, and the client didn't really, couldn't really tell the difference, as long as you could see the person speaking. That was all they really cared about. So yeah, that was a great opportunity to just try out lighting human faces from different angles.
So it's almost as if like with every shoot, you actually, because you start off that route, so you had a little bit more, it gave you a little bit more wiggle room to sort of be experimental a bit more than you would be than if you were doing than if you've already had like training behind it. Because I've got a question here actually from one of our students, and it says like, was it easier for you to get into film without going to uni back then than it would be now?
I don't know if I can answer that, because I mean, all I know is that the way I went, it did sort of eventually work out. I definitely had moments where I regretted not going to university, regretted missing out on the whole social aspect of it. There was a period a couple of years ago when, I was struggling for film work, and I was seriously thinking about, moving to a different career. And I thought, oh God, almost any other industry, it would be quite useful to have a degree right now, which I don't. So, I think if you've got any doubts about whether film is right for you, then definitely having a degree is really useful. And then there's the thing of having access to equipment and like-minded people to work on your films with you. So there's definitely benefits there. I mean, I guess my equivalent of going to university or film school was that when I was in my early 20s, I made a couple of no budget features off my own back, which I kind of wrote, directed, produced, shot, edited, pretty much did everything. And they probably cost me about as much money as going to university would have done as well. But yeah, I learned huge amounts from that. And yeah, so I suppose that was kind of my self-film schooling.
Well, brilliant. Well, I think it's about time we now move on to start looking into some of your actual work. So we are going to look into Ren, is that correct? That's the first project we're going to look into?
Yes. So Ren the Girl with a Mark, it's a web series, 5 10-minute episodes. We only ever made one season, sadly, for various reasons. And this was 2014, end of 2014 we shot it, and early 2016 it came out. And all the episodes are on YouTube, and they're also edited together into one sort of 45 or 50-minute episode on Amazon Prime. And I think probably the best thing is if we show the first clip of Khan's house, just to give you a flavour of it.
Of course.
Maybe I should let you use that bow more often.
Let me? I'm better at it than you, anyway.
Well, that might be true if you practice more.
Hard enough getting away as it is. Father's a proud man.
He's stubborn.
He does the best he can, you know that. The market doesn't yield much for him.
Even today?
Bigger market just means more competition.
I sense I'm not going to get any fish today.
Oh. I'll trade you.
Ah, my salt. So salt, but no fish.
Well, you could always come back and you could have some.
Yeah, so that was a clip from the first episode. So you can see the sort of magical fantasy look that we were going for.
Yeah, it looks. Yeah, because the lighting and the way that things are shot and done like that, you're focusing on the fantasy kind of element. So it would. So that means how would you set up a scene like that, for example?
Well, the first thing was the set. You know, the sets were just amazing on this series. And you can see it was 36 grand. It was Kickstarter funded. Everyone was working for free. A lot of it is set outside in this sort of medieval type village, which was built in a car park by volunteers. Just incredible, and I'll show some photos of that in a minute. But and the interiors sets as well, just fantastic. So it's incredibly inspirational as a director of photography when you walk onto a well-made set. Because I'd worked very little on sets at this point. Almost everything I'd done had been on location, and often not especially well-dressed locations either. You know, I'd done a lot of projects that didn't really have an art department, or, you know, didn't really have the budget to paint or dress a room even. So this was just an incredible opportunity. So I started with the set, and it was made out of these sort of twisted willow branches. So there were gaps in the roof. So I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we had beams of light coming down through here? So we put up our largest light, which was a 2.5 kilowatt HMI Fresnel. And I managed to had to kind of climb up on this metal, because the studio wasn't actually a studio. It was a abandoned, well, not abandoned, it was a disused factory. So I had to climb up on this metal tank thing and rig this light above and behind the set, because if you want backlight and if you want shafts of light to show up, you need two things. You need smoke and you need backlight to show the smoke up. So the light was placed above and behind the set, which gives you the wonderful dappled effect as well. And then there was a soft light coming in from the left-hand side, which was, I think, just a 4x4 Kina flow. So that's a fluorescent fixture. And then we had some bare bulbs down in the corner with red and orange gel on them to represent a fireplace off camera.
Okay. Right, so just on that lighting alone, I can see that there must have been a lot of time to sort of like test things out, to try and get the effect you're looking for.
Yeah, the nice thing was because we were basically all living in this factory while we were shooting it as well. So we were like sleeping on airbeds and things. The set, that particular set, was one of the first to be built. So I had quite a long time I had to walk past it most days to get to the other set. So I had a lot of time to think about how I was going to tackle it. Yeah, so a lot of thought went into that one. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, one of the things I liked about what you kind of do as well is that you're very open almost about how you actually set up shots. You actually, I've seen you things like on Instagram and things like that where you have like full lighting setups and little videos about to do that. So I'm assuming that's what we're going to look into for the rest of the time today. We're going to go through each of these sort of things, talk about how you have them set up, gives our students a few little fun ideas and some inspiration about how to do that. So let's look into the scenes of Ren, for example. Let's look how the lighting was set up for that.
Yeah, so I'll just go back to here and show you. So this gives you a bit of an idea behind the scenes. You can see the sort of camera rigs we were using. So at the time I owned a Blackmagic production camera, which had I think it only just come out that year. You know, since been superseded by many. Blackmagic Design comes out with a new model of camera at least once a year.
That's true.
But yeah, so we had a B and C camera operators who had their own Blackmagic cinema cameras as well. So we were all on Blackmagics, very sort of low tech, low budget rigs. You can see we had this kind of scaffolding tube slider thing, which one of the crew had built. And you can sort of see some glimpses of the outdoor set in these photographs as well. A lot of smoke used again for that sort of fantasy atmosphere. And a big part of it, actually a big part of Ren, because so much of it was outdoors, was trying to get some sort of continuity in the weather and the light, which is quite difficult. And sometimes just kind of gave up. But like, so we had an HMI, which we used outdoors, which is a daylight powered lamp. So if the sun went in, we would put that on, and we might just about get away with that in a close-up as being a bit of sun, but the wide shots we often had to take what we could get. But you can see here, this is some bits of a spreadsheet where I just broke down the script scene by scene. I was kind of written in basically what the action is, where it is, interior, exterior, time of day, and then thoughts on camera, lighting, and special effects. So things like, how are we going to track with these characters running through the forest? Do we need to film out the window of a car, or is there a smooth road? You know, what's the power supply going to be in the forest? Do the characters carry flaming torches? Down here, I've had an idea about depth of field. So the series is about this girl who bonds with a spirit, which gives her kind of superpowers, I suppose. And any time in the story when things were going on with the spirit inside her, I decided I would reduce the depth of field so that, just her face was sharp and everything else would go really blurry. So I've noted that in the camera column here. So typically I was shooting on an f4, and then I might go down to an f2 or even f1.4 for those scenes where things were happening with the spirit. And you can see also here I've got green mist rises. I think that was something that was specified in the script. So I was like, what interactive lighting are we going to need? In fact, you can see this green gelled light here was for interactive lighting for her special powers. And in fact, we shot all of those twice, once with and once without the interactive light, and ended up going without in the end, because the director decided she wanted the powers to be a different color, not the green. So it's always useful to have that get out of jail free card of an alternate take for stuff like that.
I wanted to ask them basically, because some of the students that we introduce them to camera logs like this. So how important is it actually to have like something like this, like a spreadsheet, whether it's looking about what you need to prepare for each kind of scene or shot, at least? How important is that when you're going into something like this?
It's preparation is so important. You know, things always change on the day. Particularly, the one big unknown is always the actors, because you can plan and plan and plan. You can do beautiful storyboards or previs or whatever, but the actor might turn up on the day and say, "Oh, it doesn't feel right that my character would stand here. I think he would stand over there," and that might mess up your shots completely. But nonetheless, having a plan and something to fall back on is incredibly useful. And I don't have one fixed way that I always use of prepping and breaking down a script. The film I'm currently prepping, I do have a spreadsheet much like this, but more detailed. But other projects, I've just done a shot list, or done some very rough storyboards, or sometimes I annotate the script, be it a hard copy with a pen or highlighters, or you know, an annotated PDF. The problem with doing it on the script, though, is that they keep issuing new drafts, and then you have to transfer all your notes over, and it's just adds extra time and effort.
So basically, don't use the hard copy unless you're guaranteed it's the last copy.
Yeah. But yeah, I think this format of just breaking things down by scene and just having ideas for camera and lighting, and I share this with the director as well, and with the production designer quite often, because it will impact on them, and the gaffer who's going to have to set up the lighting as well. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Oh, and on that prep subject, sorry, this is some images. There's a director's viewfinder app called Artemis Pro, and I use that all the time. I think it's about 20 or 30 quid, but it's absolutely worth it. It can simulate any length of lens. So you tell it what camera you're shooting on and what set of lenses you have, and it simulates the correct field of view, the correct crop factor, and it records, you know, your GPS position, the amount of tilt, sunset and sunrise times for the day you're intending to shoot, all kinds of useful stuff. So we didn't ever really have a shot list for Ren apart from one big scene. So what we would do is, on the day, Kate, the director, would rehearse and block the actors, and I would go around with Artemis taking images like these ones on the left, finding shots that I liked, and then when Kate was done rehearsing, I would show her the shots and she would say yes or no, or maybe what about this instead, and then we could start shooting, and you can see, you know, the finished results.
So it's kind of like making a storyboard literally on the day kind of thing, but you're using this app to give you a proper visual representation, because you know what depth of field, lens, and everything else. That's really useful. Yeah,
it doesn't simulate depth of field, unfortunately, but it does the field of view, which is the important thing. And the feature I'm prepping at the moment, we'll definitely be doing this. We've actually got a full rehearsal week, so I'll be doing loads of this during the rehearsals. Yeah, it's really useful.
So yeah, I'm assuming then that you're very kind enough to like show us a behind-the-scenes video of Ren, showing you what you did with some of the lighting and stuff. Would it be all right to show that then? Oh yes. So this is a clip from when Ren originally came out. I made my own sort of companion YouTube series breaking down the cinematography in each episode, and it's called Lensing Ren. You should be able to find it fairly easy on YouTube if you search for that and my name. But yeah, here's a clip.
Episode 2 starts with a big scene in Ren's house. Now, the first thing you do as a cinematographer looking at a set is to ask yourself where light would be coming from. So here we have two little windows, we have candles dotted about, and we have a fireplace that's mostly off screen, but which Dagron is going to throw the book into later. I put a 2.5K HMI outside the living room window, and since I didn't have another HMI, I put a little LED Fresnel outside the bedroom window, which is only in the deep background for this scene anyway. Now, the shaft of light from the living room window looks really good, but because the window's so small, it's not doing a great deal to illuminate the scene. So we put up a 4x4 Kino poking over the top of the set above the window. This simulates softer, indirect daylight as opposed to the hard directional sunlight of the HMI. To beef up the light from the candles, I clamped dados to the top of the set above the sconces. Now, dados are tungsten lamps, so they show up orange on camera when I white balance for the daylight sources. For the fireplace, I bounced an 800-watt tungsten area light into the gold side of a collapsible reflector, and we have someone wiggling that reflector throughout the scene. So you can see in the wide shots that the 4x4 Kina flow above the window is doing most of the work, giving the characters a nice wrapping backlight that contrasts with the orange front light of the fireplace. Normally, I don't like front lights, it's not a good idea in cinematography at all, but because it's flickering, we get away with it. When we moved on to the singles, I turned off the 4x4 and brought in a 2x4 Kino on a stand, placing it inside the set near to the window. By doing this, I can cheat the angle of the soft daylight to get the most flattering and appropriate light on the actors' faces. I'm not a fan of top light, and it was necessary in the wide shots to keep the lamps out of frame, so as soon as we're on singles, I want the light to be coming much more from eye level. It's so important to get light into actors' eye sockets, or you lose some of the performance.
Yeah, very, very insightful stuff.
Thanks. And yeah, you can see all those videos on YouTube if you search for Lensing Ren, and indeed the whole Ren the Girl, the Mark series as well.
One thing I noticed is that a lot of some of it is very it's very practically based, but some of it looks like as if it's very almost like very DIY kind of element, like doing the fire, for example, that one bouncing it off the golden reflector. Do you sometimes prefer doing things like just like a little bit DIY-ish, something a little bit of a practical, try it out kind of approach?
Yeah, it's I love experimenting with stuff like that. I still use that. That's the main way I do fire effects still now, is bouncing lights off reflectors like that. There are all kinds of other things you can do, you know, wiring a bunch of bulbs up to a dimmer board, and, you know, even having a large LED screen displaying footage of actual fire. That's a technique that's used quite a lot now, but yeah, can't beat a simple tungsten light and a £5 reflector off Amazon.
I think that's the good thing that we've discussed, is because at the moment, a lot of our students are, I feel like when a lot of our students are getting, I feel a little bit worried, a little bit nervous that we might not be able, they might be able to get all the great, super expensive, very high-end equipment, but sometimes just showing them, hey, you could do a fire with just a light bulb and with just one light and a reflector, it shows you can still pull off some very interesting effects.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so are we still, is there anything more about Ren before we move on to the next section?
Let's move on to Little Mermaid, I think.
Okay, so we're now going to move on to Little Mermaid. This was a feature film for yours. So would you want to sort of introduce the first clip or anything like that before we sort of move on onto the slides, things like that?
Yeah, so let's have the circus clip, the first circus clip.
Okay.
You ready? Let's go.
Come on.
Okay, then there we go. So that was from your feature film, from the feature film we worked on, The Little Mermaid. So let's break it down a little bit. How was the experience doing it that time around? It's very different, obviously, because you worked on from a web series now to a feature, so there must be some very different protocols.
Yeah. So as soon as I put Ren on my show reel, I noticed that I was being taken a bit more seriously as a DP. It was definitely felt like a step up, and I think a lot of that, to be honest, was as much to do with the amazing production design on that show as anything, because often when people look at a show reel, they, even quite experienced industry professionals, they can't necessarily, they could see, oh, that looks good, but they can't necessarily separate particularly cinematography and production design, which is so closely entwined. So yeah, I started to be offered a higher quality of work, and I did my first, because I'd done like 6 or 8 unpaid micro budget features by that point. But not long after Ren, I got my first paid feature, which was a kind of 600 grand horror movie. And almost straight after that, I got The Little Mermaid, which was co-directed by Chris Bouchard, who was one of the ADs on Ren. So that's how he knew of me and my work. He's a British director, but The Little Mermaid was an American production shot in Savannah, Georgia. So the two of us flew over there for 2 or 3 months to make this independent live action reimagining of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale with a $4 million budget, which was my first 7-figure budget. It was quite, it's quite exciting. And we had 5 weeks, I think, of full-time prep. So I was out there for 5 weeks looking at locations and looking at the sets as they were being built, having meetings, figuring out equipment, hiring a crew, because of course normally your camera assistants and your lighting crew, you hire people you worked with before, but I wasn't allowed to bring anyone over from the UK, so I had to interview and hire people locally. So that was a whole process. It was a big deal, and there were definitely things about working on a feature of that size that I didn't know, but what was quite nice is I could sort of pretend it was because, we do things slightly different in the UK.
Slide that underneath.
If someone used a term I hadn't heard, I go, we what's that? We must call that something different in Britain.
We'll figure it out. But speaking of which, I've got a question here that I think would be kind of sorted out, because you had 5 weeks of prep leading into this. So one of our students actually said, do you have any tips? What are the tips are when you're working with a director and producer, especially around that, let's say the pre-production, production phase? So
yeah. Well, I think the first thing is so much about getting inside the director's head, finding out what they like and what they don't like. And really, that's a case of showing them things and seeing how they react. So, show them clips from other movies, or better still, sit down and watch other films together and discuss what you do and don't like about them. Show them photos, mood boards. It might even be paintings, classical art. Anything to start to get a handle on, what they do and don't like, and focus in. So, I've used Pinterest boards a lot. In fact, I can show you my Pinterest board from The Little Mermaid. So this is screen grabs from other movies, pictures of like lighting fittings I thought we might want to use. Practical lights that you might see in the circus, 1 or 2 images from the art department, photos of the cast, looking at, because we had scenes with a train and with a riverboat, so looking at how other people had photographed those things. Hook was a good reference, the Steven Spielberg film that was specifically suggested by one of the directors. And The Little Princess as well. So looking at sort of color contrast, so you can see this idea of kind of quite strong oranges and blues contrasting, which you probably saw in the clip just now, and you'll see in some of the other clips. Again, a kind of magical feel, and not too dissimilar from Ren, actually. That was a big part of why I got the job, I think, because I'd done something with a similar vibe to it before.
What I find quite interesting is things like having like a Pinterest or having a mood board. Like, does this help you sort of break down the vision of it as you go along? Because when you read a script, sometimes even a director doesn't have a visual idea. So having something like this, does this actually really help overall?
Yeah, it definitely does. And the film I'm currently working on, I've actually combined that with my scene by scene breakdown. So I'm actually putting, for each row of the spreadsheet for each scene, I'm actually putting 1 or 2 reference images in for that scene. So getting more specific to see the changing moods and styles as the story developed as well. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful, excellent. Do you have anything else you want to? Anything else we can go into and discuss? About
Yeah. So, well, here's an image, a couple of images from behind the scenes. So we were shooting on an Arri Alexa, which is probably the best known and best loved digital camera out there. It's been on top of the pile for many years now. And it's still the best digital camera out there. I think most DPs would agree. So it's really nice to have. In fact, 2 of those we had. So this is the camera department. So 7 people just in the camera department. So the camera department's got 3 more people in it than the entire crew on some of those early productions I did. And this is our camera truck as well. So we've got an entire truck full of our camera gear, which was really nice to have. And Shirley MacLaine had a role in it. So, you know, she's kind of Hollywood royalty. She's won an Oscar and various things. So that was a big deal. She was only on set for 2 days, but that was quite nice. When she looked
still there.
Yeah. And when she looked at the monitor and liked how it was lit, that was quite a compliment.
Wanted to just ask quickly that you have because you have a crew, a bit of a crew. How different is it when you have, like, say, a small camera crew, which is like you and maybe your assistant, than having, let's say, 7 or 8 people now in a crew? How does that differ?
It's very different, and it's one of the things they. Well, I didn't go to film school, so maybe they do, but I don't think it's one of the things they teach you in film school is about the people management side of being a head of department on a film. Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise to me, really. Yes, one of the things that happens often on low budget films is that the producer wants the crew to work longer hours or wants to pay them lower rates or not pay per diems or something like that. And so you've got that pulling on you from one direction, and then you've got your camera assistants who are saying, oh, the hours are too long, I'm not getting enough money, it's not fair that we're not getting per diems. And balancing those 2 things up is an interesting political sort of juggling act. You know, sometimes, you know, you're asked to go an hour into overtime. And you know, so many films I've done over my career, you know, the call sheet didn't even have a wrap time. Even if there was a call sheet, you know, you just work until it was done, and you wouldn't complain about the ridiculously long hours. But when you've got a load of camera assistants who, you know, they're to them it's a bit more of a job, right? Like, working on films is fun, but it's most fun for creative heads of department. It's a little less fun if you're a focus puller or doing the slate and things. And you know, you want to work reasonable hours and be able to drive home without being so tired you're going to crash and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's walking that line and sort of being willing to go the extra mile for the production, but also being aware that that has implications for the people working under you and treating them fairly as well. That's yeah, it's a tricky thing to navigate, and I'm still trying to figure it out, to be honest.
There's obviously you say you're working on a feature film, not going to delve into any closer, but do you know if you've got a big crew for that one as well?
Certainly smaller than this one. We've got 2 ACs, so focus puller and a clapper loader and a data wrangler. So that's 4 of us in the camera department. We might have a crane tech and a grip for a couple of days. And then I think we've got 3 people in lighting: gaffer, best boy, and spark.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Right,
We had
so
on top of this camera department, we had another 7 or 8 people in lighting on the Little Mermaid as well.
So it's that was massive then.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what else have you got?
So this is the portion of the shot list. So this was quite unusual in that. So initially there was just one director, And he wanted to focus very much on the actors, and he wanted me to really take care of the shots and come up with a shot list by myself. And he wasn't planning to get that involved with where the camera was, really, which is quite unusual. You know, directors vary tremendously. Some are very, very specific, and some are much more hands-off. But this was more hands-off than I'd ever experienced before. So I went through and I did this entire shot list. And you can see I've noted things like whether it might be shot with a B camera, because of course we had 2 cameras on this, and whether we needed any special equipment. And actually in the end, what happened, for various reasons I won't get into, but it ended up being 2 directors, so co-directors, and one of the directors focused on the actors and one very much on the camera. So in the end, my shot list wasn't really used. But what was great about it, it did actually force me to look at the script and think about the script much more closely than I would have done if I'd not produced a shot list. So actually, I think it was a useful exercise to do anyway. And here are some of the storyboards. So there was a professional storyboard artist who was hired to do boards of certain sequences. Again, I don't remember that we referred to these much on set. It was more a pre-production tool to be able to show people in advance what we would see and what we wouldn't see. And we're going to actually have a look at a clip from this scene in a minute. And it was actually a scene where a long dialogue scene in the ocean. One of the characters was a 10 or 11-year-old girl. So we were very concerned about actor comfort and the people being able to emote whilst being up to their shoulders in the actual ocean. So it was like, do we build a small set with a green screen or how do we do it? So that was one of the reasons we storyboarded it to work out what we were going to need.
Okay. One thing before we show the clip then, I want to ask actually, because this is something we don't get to do often, how much of a communication do cinematographers have with like a storyboard artist? Like, do there's a lot? Is it mostly through a director? How does that work?
I think it varies. I haven't done that many projects where there was an actual storyboard artist. I've done a few where the director drew some thumbnails themselves. I've done 1 or 2 where I've drawn them myself, but yeah, very few with an actual professional storyboard artist. The way we worked on this, I think, is we had a 3-way meeting. Basically, that's what happened. Is me, the director, and the storyboard artist sat down and talked it through. I think in some cases, just the director and the storyboard artist had a meeting. The storyboard artist produced a draft, and then the 3 of us sat down and talked it over, and revisions were made.
Okay.
But I don't think there's any fixed way. It sort of it depends, you know, how specific the director wants to be. You know, I've heard of things like I have the book The Making of Jurassic Park, which was a massive influence on me when I was a kid, and one of the things that made me want to be a filmmaker. And it has all the storyboards in the back. And the text seems to imply that basically Spielberg gave a copy of Michael Crichton's book to the storyboard artist and said, here, storyboard this, and didn't have any input on it. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I certainly think there are cases where the storyboard artist just makes up their own shots, at least for the first pass, and then the director revises it. So I think it varies a lot.
Okay, wonderful. Now, we're going to show a clip next. So what is this clip that we're going to see now?
You know what, before we do that, I've got these slides in a slightly stupid order, actually. But this is the lighting plan, a retrospective lighting plan for the clip we previously showed, which is for the big crane shot up over the circus sign. Just to show you what went into this, because this is the biggest lighting setup I've ever done. I think it was something like 80 kilowatts, and it's, you know, roughly the size of a football field. And this is the original footage here, and you might remember from the clip there are 1 or 2 extra tents in the side in the final shot. Well, those were added in post, but everything you see here. Actually, can you see my mouse pointer, by the way?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, everything you see here was real. So there's a real big top and all these rides in the background. So all of that had to be lit. So we had a big condor, which is the American name for a cherry picker, with a couple of 18 kilowatt HMIs on it. That was kind of our moonlight. And then we had another smaller HMI over here, which was just giving us this little bit of edge on the tents, so they didn't blend into darkness. And then lots of tungsten light. We had big maxi brutes, which are panels of tungsten lights inside the big top, making them glow. We had a 5K at the back, which just bounced off the side of the tent and helped light some of these rides. We had par cans, which are theatrical lights, which we put along the bottom of these little banners, uplighting those. A couple of lights hidden in the tents, and a couple in the foreground to light the foreground characters as well. Wow. So yeah, quite a big. That was I think it took a day or two for the lighting crew to cable all that up, and I think there were 2 or 3 generators running. It was a massive thing. The bit scary thing about that is, of course, once you've rigged that, especially the 18Ks on the Condor, it's pretty hard to move them if you put them up and decide they're in the wrong place. Well, you kind of have to live with it unless you want the production to wait for half a day while you move it all.
Is that basically what's so useful having like a lighting plan, is at least say like, this is how we're going to go for it, and then you at least know what to change if you need to change right away or anything like that? Yeah, sounds good. Looking at these lighting plans, that looks quite rigorous. I can say that's a lot of lights to keep an eye on at once.
Yeah, and all these string lights as well, these kind of festoon lights, whatever you want to call them. Because we actually had, the other thing that we had and didn't use is we hired one of those helium balloons that has a light in it.
Wow.
Which was a really cool thing. And we were going to float it in this area here, but actually we found that even though these little string lights are only 40 watts each, there are so many of them that they provided enough light in that central area, so we didn't end up using the balloon.
Wonderful. Shame about the balloon, but nice to. But it's nice to show that sometimes just having like little lights like that can just help cover up a scene.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. So we've got. Let's look at the other circus clip, and then we'll come back to that scene in the ocean. If that's
wonderful.
The Little Mermaid of the Mississippi.
Al.
There we go. Wow. Just wanted to ask quickly then, with the mermaid shot, there was she actually like having in some kind of tail suit? Was she actually swimming around, or was that a visual effect?
She was actually in a tail. Yeah, I think the production got in touch with these people exist called professional mermaids who are women that do displays wearing these rubber mermaid tails. So I think the production got in touch with some of them, and one of them came along as an advisor, and I think we hired that tank off them as well. And I think the tail was made in a similar way to those professional mermaids tails. Yeah, and I think you can actually see some wrinkles on it, which we were hoping would get painted out in post, but that didn't happen.
It's just the tiniest detail. We're more distracted by the beautiful mermaid swimming in the tank. I've got a question to ask you while we're here before we show the next clip, which is one of our students has basically asked, what would you suggest is the best way to portray emotions with the camera. So if you were going to use your cinematography to help portray certain emotions, what kind of hints and tips, or how would you suggest you do that?
Well, that's a huge thing. It's a big part of cinematography. I don't think there's one best way. It's more a case of what is the best way for the production. So it might be choosing the depth of field, like I mentioned earlier with Ren. If someone is has got things going on inside their head, maybe if they've got mental health troubles, or they're just thinking a lot about something, maybe you want to shrink the depth of field. Whereas if they're very connected to the world around them, maybe you want a large depth of field. One of the more obvious things is handheld versus sticks. You know, if you've got a scene with a lot of energy or action or emotion, you might want to go handheld. Whereas if it's quieter and more still, then you might want sticks. Lenses make a big difference as well. If you get very physically close to someone with a short lens, it almost caricatures their facial features. It can be a bit distorting, but it also getting physically closer, even though an audience doesn't consciously know that you've put the camera closer on a short lens, you can feel it subconsciously from the perspective. And I think it makes the scene feel more intimate. Whereas if you put the camera further away on a longer lens, I think you get just subtly feel that you're a bit more of an outsider on the scene. It feels a bit more stylized, and you feel more like an observer than someone who's physically involved. Composition is a big one. To use an extreme example, the Amazon series Mr. Robot, the lead character in that has mental health issues, and they represent that by using very unusual framing, where, you know, his head's down here in the shot or something and he's talking off the side, which is, you know, completely breaks all the rules of composition, but it gives you that kind of unsettling feeling. So yeah, there's so many different things: composition, choice of lenses, choice of depth of field, use of colors, slightly more of a lighting than a camera thing. Height of the camera, low angle versus high angle, obviously implies inferiority or superiority. Yeah, all the different styles of camera movement. In that clip we just used, was one of the few scenes in that movie where we used a Steadicam, because we wanted to be in that fluid sort of swimming mermaid type motion. We wanted to reflect that in the camera work. So yeah, so there's so many things. Cinematography is almost entirely about representing emotions and story through your camera decisions, really. So I'd experiment with it all. That's what I'd say.
So just to sort of add on that last bit then, basically, so is it basically, because obviously when we train them how to use cameras and do the rules of like cinematography and so on, we always establish that there are rules. So is it actually okay to tell them, like, it's okay to break the rules every so often just to try out and see if it works?
Yeah, rules are made to be broken. I mean, know why you're breaking the rules, I'd say, you know, and I think you do need to learn the rules before you break them as well. Because, you know, Chris, one of the directors of The Little Mermaid, he's quite strict on rules. You know, he has strong feelings about eye line, that the camera should always be at the same height as a character's eye line, unless there's a very good reason to change that. Just to give one example. So then, you know, if you choose which rules you're going to stick to and which ones you're going to break. Because I think if you break all of them, you're just going to end up with a mess and it's going to look amateur. So I think, yeah, you choose which ones you're going to stick to and you choose which ones you're going to break. Because often the rules that you stick to, usually those are the ones the audience won't notice, right? They'll just see that as normal. And sometimes you want that. You certainly don't want ever for the camera work to distract from the story, but you, even on a subconscious level, you don't always want the camera, you know, pinging up suggestions to the audience. You want to pick your moment. It's like music. You don't want music all the way through your film because then it has no power. You need some scenes that have no music, so when the music comes in, it has an effect. And it's the same with breaking the rules.
All right, fantastic. Brilliant. That's actually a really good piece of advice, because I feel like it allows them to be our students to be more creative, hopefully, when they do their camera shots. Now, we're going to look into the next clip, I believe. Do you want to explain what this clip is? Is this the ocean scene, basically?
Yeah, so this is the one that we saw the storyboards for. And why don't we watch the clip and then I'll explain how we did it.
All right, there we go.
Thank you.
Deep water is magic, just like her love. Whenever she can't breathe, all she need do is swim.
I'll miss you.
Okay, that was the clip that we showed from the storyboard before. Now, how do you want to elaborate anything more on that scene or on how that was going on? So,
yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, we were concerned about comfort of the actors and ability to emote in the ocean and things, and we had thought about doing it on a set or some other kind of controlled environment. Ultimately, the budget wasn't there to do it that way, and we ended up doing it for real. I mean, in the story it's meant to be sunrise, but we actually did it at sunset. But that was really the only cheat to it. But it's what's interesting about it is that in the same movie we had that big crane up shot in the circus that was 80 kilowatts of artificial light and 2 days to rig. And then a handheld shot in the ocean with a real sunset. And literally the only lighting thing we're doing is that there's a guy in fishing waders with a white polystyrene board, just reflecting a bit of that sun back into their faces as fill. But the important thing was knowing where the sun was going to set. And again, you can get apps for that. We were very lucky that there wasn't any cloud cover, because that would have ruined the sunset. The production obviously had to be aware of the times of the tide, because there was a thing with there were some quite sharp oyster beds in that area, and depending on how high the tide was, because what happened is we shot it over 2 days. I think it was a Friday. We shot it at sunset on a Friday, and we shot the whole thing in a master shot and did 2 or 3 takes, I think. And then reviewed the footage over the weekend, came back on the Monday and shot the tighter angles again at sunset. But the time of the tide had changed by then. So we actually had to, whereas we could just walk into the ocean on the Friday, on the Monday, we actually all had to be dropped into the ocean by boat, because otherwise we'd had to have walked over these dangerously sharp oyster beds.
my goodness.
Which was quite interesting. it was also a big thing because we had to show them coming down the beach and getting into the water. And once Poppy's hair was wet, well, both the girls, once their hair was wet, it was going to take like an hour or something to get it dry. So we were only going to get only the first take, being able to see them come down the beach and go in the water. After that, we would have to pick it up from the point they were in the water. So we rehearsed it a lot on dry land. As I said, we worked out where the sun was going to set. I remember when we actually went for the take, the first take, and William Moseley, the male lead, is carrying Poppy down the beach, and he picked her up. I can't remember. He picked her up with her head on one side and the tail on the other, and it was the opposite way round. And I had to ask him to pick her up the other way round because I could see, having blocked it through on dry land, that if he continued with her that way round, I was going to end up with my back to the sun, so we wouldn't have the sun in the background of the shot, so it wouldn't be anywhere near as nice aesthetically, but also I would have been casting massive camera shadows all over them.
Wow.
So that, planning was very important. Also, I shot most of the movie with a filter called Soft Effects, which just slightly gives a pro misty type softening effect, just takes the digital edge off the images. But I knew from past experience with that filter that if you have the sun or any bright light shining straight into the lens, it reflects off the filter and you get a square of light all over the actors. So I had to know that to take the filter out for that shot, otherwise it would have ruined the whole thing. Oh, that's the other thing, we had a splash bag. So we had a splash bag, which was basically a waterproof bag with a port of optical glass in it, and it's waterproof down to a couple of meters, I think. So it's not for proper underwater filming, but just at and around the surface. And we put it in the water the first day to test it, and it leaked.
Oh no.
Yeah, so thank God the ACs tested it first. So we ended up, that's why some of the angles in the scene are a little bit higher than I would have liked, because I had to have the camera on my shoulder when I had an AC next to me who was ready to catch the camera if it looked like it was going to fall in the water. Yeah, and then the second day we'd fixed the splash bag. Actually, the line producer went out and got a $2 bicycle repair kit and fixed the splash bag with that, which did the job perfectly. And then we were able to get lower angles on the second day. Yeah, but it's just basically planning was the secret to that. Because
you tested that out loud, you're going, right, I can get rid of this, but then the second day now you could have like literally a bicycle kit fix up to get that bit sorted out. That's amazing.
Oh, and there's some pictures from us filming it.
Wonderful. Wow.
So you've got the guy here with the bounce board. Someone with a boob, and we had our B camera was actually on this little boat trying to get an alternate angle, but he never managed to get anything usable because there was always one of the other crew in the way, which is one of the difficulties of trying to shoot with two cameras.
Wow. While we're on this point, actually, before we move on to the next one per se, I've got two questions to ask. So we got we have one student, Charlie Sharp. He asks, actually, what are some things that a director can do to make your job more effective and easier?
I think not tinkering with the script too much once I started work, that would definitely help. But that always happens. I think the sooner they can start to have an idea of blocking, the better, really, because you can look at the locations as many times as you want, but if you don't know where people are going to stand within that space, it can be hard to light. It can be hard to light the space if you don't know it, because it can make a big difference. If someone is sat at the desk over there versus by the window, it might make a big difference to how you approach lighting the scene. So, but then, of course, as I said earlier, the actor might show up on the day and change all that. So you do have to be flexible to some extent. But yeah, just being as specific as soon as they can is useful, really. And if it's the kind of director who is going to do the shot list by themselves or mostly by themselves, then getting that shot list to me as soon as possible is useful. And then, yeah, just visual ideas, like we said earlier, mood boards, you know, exchanging images. If they've got reference films are so useful as well. If they go, I want it to look like this film, and this film, you know. No one wants to feel they're copying another movie, but it is a fantastically useful shorthand.
Well, let's just look at Tarantino in himself. He just references so many that it becomes its own thing. So it's fine to reference. One last question from this before we move on to the next bit is one of our students basically asked, said, is it surreal to see a finished feature film that the whole world can see was shots you took?
I don't know if it's surreal, but it's nice. It's certainly very nice. You know, I've yet to work on a feature that had a UK cinema release, which is slightly disappointing. So a couple of films I've shot have had a theatrical release in the US and then gone straight to video or Netflix or whatever in the UK. And I did one film where I did a day's pickup shooting that did get a UK release, but I would love to be able to go to the cinema and see my name up on a main, you know, single screen title card in the UK. But I mean, well, currently right now, I just love to go to a cinema full stop. But,
fair, very fair. Hopefully that'll be soon. And then when that happens, then hopefully with your next feature up in the works, you might see it up there.
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next, move on to your next little project. So you want to explain what this project is before we introduce the clips and stuff like that?
Sure. So this is another feature film. I did this straight after The Little Mermaid, actually. This is called Above the Clouds. And I got this job because it was quite nice, actually. I'd worked with the director, Leon Chambers, about, I think it was like 12 years previously. I had shot a short film for him. And he'd subsequently gone away, shot a number of other short films with a number of other DPs. But he chose to come back to me for his first feature, which was just amazing. And I think it was a lot to do with the fact that I blog regularly. And he had been following my blog. You know, he's one of those people that I hadn't really kept in touch with over that time, but we were Facebook friends. So he was able to keep abreast of what I was doing through my blogs. So I think that, in combination with having done the short earlier, is why I got the job. And as you can see, much smaller production than The Little Mermaid, 60 grand. The director funded it all himself. We did get to shoot on Alexas mostly. There's some other supplementary cameras as well. I was lucky. Leon's quite a technically minded director, which helps because when a lot of the prep for this was going on, I was still in the States shooting The Little Mermaid. So some of the decisions about equipment and things he actually had to make by himself, but he was definitely experienced enough to do that. And you can see the film. It's out on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, and I think some other platforms as well. But shall we watch the first clip, which I think is the driving one?
Yeah, let's watch the first clip.
What if he's had a sex change and I've got two mums? Or he could be an earl of somewhere. Or he could be an actor and I could have been seeing him on TV for years and not even known he was my dad.
Don't watch much TV.
No, I guess not. What do you do for kicks then? Drink?
What makes you ask that?
Just something that Jack says. People like that have just made bad choices.
Does Jack know many of the domestically challenged?
Don't get much more domestic than him.
Well, there you go.
So do you then? Drink.
You offering?
All right, so there we go. So let's talk a little bit about how the production for this one must have been very different to Little Mermaid, both just on a budgetary thing alone. So how did you have to sort some of those how to sort out some of those shots from there.
Yeah. So yeah, I went from having 5 weeks of prep on the Little Mermaid to really, I think I spent 2 days going around the locations with Leon, and then a few sort of phone calls and things, and a bit of work on my own at home. Yeah, it was a very different experience. It was, you know, if he hadn't been so technically minded, I'm not quite sure it would have worked, but because he knew what he was doing, and he was very hands-on. So it's a comedy road movie. It's about this girl, Charlie. She discovers on her 18th birthday that her dad is only her adopted dad. Her real father lives on the Isle of Skye. So her road trip is from Kent up to Scotland. And although it seems like we would have to go all over the place to shoot a movie like that, actually we shot 3 weeks in Kent and like 3 days on the Isle of Skye and a couple of little pickups elsewhere. But actually most of it was shot in quite a contained area, and the vast majority of the interiors were actually shot in the director's living room. He sort of turned his living room into a studio for the shoot, and built about 5 or 6 different sets in there over the course of production, which was
That's impressive.
Just crazy. Yeah. And smaller crew, of course. So we had 2 ACs. In fact, I think he wanted me to do it with just 1 AC to start with, and managed to convince him to expand to so we could have a separate focus puller and clapper loader. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a nightmare. And one gaffer and no one else in lighting. So yeah, the gaffer and I kind of ended up setting a lot of the lighting ourselves. Yeah.
It sounds like everything was far more hands-on now because it was such a smaller crew.
Yeah, yeah. And I'd done features like that before, but this one was a lot better organized. And the script, this was possibly the best script I've ever worked on, I would say. It's really, really well written. So, you know, that was why I was kind of prepared to do the extra mile and you know, work on a low budget project, because it was so good. And the lead actors were fantastic as well.
Wonderful.
Again, like references were important. So the director gave me Little Miss Sunshine, Sideways, and Juno as the main references. Yeah, particularly some of these shots of the minibus from Little Miss Sunshine fed into how we shot the the first shot in that clip we just played is quite similar. The little car beetling along.
Okay. So I want to ask then, basically, is looking at all this, is that it's comparing this to your other 2 ones we've looked at, where they're very fantasy and allows you to have a bit more creativity on it. This one's very sort of bogged down and realistic lighting. Everything's sort of realistic. So what's the difference there when you're trying to set up for something that looks natural than something that you can get away with having a bit more of a fantasy element to it?
It's still to do with motivating sources. So you've always got to think, what would the light sources be in this space? Would it be the window? Would it be practical lamps? Would it be daylight coming in? Would it have to be moonlight or whatever? But then it's just being a bit more realistic about how you treat that. So, you know, we did use haze or smoke on some scenes, but generally at a lower level. And actually, when I look back at this film now, I think, oh, I could have been more realistic with it. I think I was slightly too much in a fantasy mode from Little Mermaid in 1 or 2 scenes. But it's about being a bit more naturalistic with colors. So, you know, if moonlight scenes not being as blue as a moonlight scene in a fantasy might be. Things like, yeah, not using so much color in the lighting, motivating things a bit more from window sources. And because, you know, we were back to a fairly small lighting package, sort of similar to what we had on Ren. So, you know, you had to be a bit more DIY about some of the stuff. If I show you some of these behind the scenes
of course
pictures. So So we shot on an Alexa Mini, which is the same sensor as the Alexa Classic, but just a smaller form factor. And that was Leon's decision mainly. He knew he wanted the high quality of the Alexa image, but knew that we'd also be filming in quite a small Fiat 500 a lot of the time, so we needed a smallish camera. But of course, once you've got a lens and a map box and a viewfinder and stuff on it, it's actually not that small a camera, which is why we ended up doing some pickups on a Blackmagic, as I'll explain in a minute. But yeah, so you can see the sort of rig and how we did some of the driving shots there, and one of the interior scenes in a pub there, which tried to keep fairly realistic in terms of the look. We had one day at Longcross Studio, which is in Buckinghamshire, and it's an ex-MOD test track. So they've got a big loop, and you can go round and round on that. So we had an A-frame attached to the car so it could be towed. We had a grip come along just for this one day with this universal mount, or hostess tray it's sometimes called, to rig the car outside the windows. Leon had said very early on that he didn't ever want to shoot through the windscreen when the car was moving, because that always looks fake to him. He feels like that's the kind of shot you can only do in a movie, so he wanted to stay away from those, which is fair enough. We had a number of Rosco light pads which Leon had bought for the production. So they're little LED pads that have quite a soft look, because the LEDs point backwards into this white reflective backing. So you're not getting direct light from the LEDs. It's sort of bounced off this white surface, which is quite nice. So we battery powered those and taped them to the dashboard, just so that when they would go under tree cover or any darker areas of the road, they would still have a little bit of light in their eye sockets, very subtly, but you know, almost to the point where you wonder, is it actually doing anything? That's the kind of level you're sometimes working on a more realistic film like this, rather than the bold kind of looks of the Little Mermaid and Ren. And we would have, so in the towing car, I would be in the back with a monitor with false colors, which tells me how the exposure is looking on the image. Rupert, the focus puller, was sitting next to me with his monitor, you know, with his focus peaking on so he could do the sharps. And then in the passenger seat, Leon, the director, had his own monitor as well. And actually they'd rigged up the sound. So I think there was a mic clamped near the gear stick, and the sound went down a cable to into the towing car and was hooked up to the radio in the car, the speakers, the stereo system in the car, so we could hear the dialogue over the car's stereo system, which is pretty cool.
It's just a funny thought of hearing that there you are driving, there's 3 people staring at monitors and 1 person listening to all the sound from a radio. It sounds amazing.
Yeah. And the clapper loader was hidden in the back seat of the picture car so that he could pop up and do the slate. And if anything technically needed adjusting in the car, he was able to do that.
My goodness, everyone had their own little compartment, basically.
Yeah. So that was how it. So that was only one day actually out of the 4 or 5 weeks of shooting that we had this elaborate rig. And we came back. We did pickups partly because we got behind schedule, partly because the Alexa Mini didn't fit into some of the spaces in the car that we'd hoped it would. And so we used this Blackmagic micro cinema camera. And again, it gets a little bit bigger once you've rigged your follow focus and the necessary things on it. But we were able to put that on the dashboard and clamp it to the windows and things. So we got certain angles that we couldn't have got otherwise with the car in motion. And we found it cut in pretty well, I have to say, with the Alexa. It was a little bit noisier, a little bit grainier. And the lens, if you look very closely at the out of focus areas, the bokeh, you could see, it wasn't quite as nice. It was a little bit blurred. But cuts in pretty well as long as you don't use it too much. And look, so many productions these days are doing that. Very few things are just shot on one camera. There's almost always a different camera that's used for body rigs, car rigs, the drone, helicopter mounts, whatever. Stunt scenes where a car might be crashing right next to a camera. So yeah, it's pretty common now to mix formats.
Because what I'm going to ask before we go in there quickly while we're there is, because you're using two different cameras, how do you plan, for example, if you know you're going to use two different cameras, how do you plan to make sure that all the shots feel at least or look or feel consistent?
I think we tried to use, so we used Zeiss lenses on both cameras. So we had sort of Arri Zeiss cinema lenses, ultra primes on the Alexa, and we had Zeiss stills lenses on the Blackmagic. I used a half soft effects filter again, just to take the digital edge off on both cameras. So that gave us some continuity. And we also tried, where we needed to put the smaller camera in a space that we couldn't put the bigger camera, we did, but we tried not to shoot in a different way unless we needed to. You can see we did rig it on a tripod for some shots and shoot in the way that we would have done with the Alexa. So we tried not to change the style of the film completely.
All right, wonderful.
And there's just a few pics of the lighting here. So again, mostly using Rosco light pads indoors. Various different effects. And you can clamp, because the great thing about LEDs is you can clamp them. They're so light, and you can battery power them, and the color temperature doesn't change when they're dimmed. I still love tungsten. I still think tungsten is the best artificial light you can get, but there's no denying that it has downsides in terms of heat and efficiency and things.
And
so this is some of the more sort of DIY type solutions. So tried to not always introduce artificial light. If there's a way to do it by just shaping the natural light, we tried to do that. So I found that when we were shooting in the car, when it's moving, there's less you can do, but when the car was static, I tried to reduce the amount of light coming in through the windows behind the camera. So if we were shooting through the windscreen, we would try to flag some of the light off the windscreen, so the light was only coming from the sides. If we were shooting through the side window, we tried to flag off that side window, so the light is only coming from the opposite window and from the windscreen. And that's one of the general principles of cinematography, that you try not to have too much light coming from the front, because it just flattens everything out and nothing looks three-dimensional anymore. And then you can see here how we've used just black drapes and diffusion attached to windows to cut down and shape the existing light. This one in the bottom right, this was a scene that we did in a cafe location, and the director said to me the night before, is there any way we can not take a lot of lights, because the cafe was open when we filmed this scene. I don't think it's not going to be ideal if we have to set up loads of lights. So and I agreed to that, and we only took one or two small lights, and we ended up but what I didn't know until I got there, because I hadn't recce'd this location, was there were skylights. So there was loads of light coming in behind camera. So we ended up setting up this enormous load of flags, and this is actually the sides of the Easy Up tent we drafted in as well to block some of the light and give it some shape. And I think we actually have a clip of this next scene, which is probably...
we'll play now.
Sorry, but the look on your face was worth its weight.
Here, what she calls someone.
It says what? Eating one of these breakfasts might be risky, but I'm pretty sure it's legal.
I mean, they could have you carted back home and me banged up quicker than a red top can say. Deviant bum snatches kid.
Well, I'm not a kid, so...
You wicked pig. You wicked, wicked pig. Odd choice for a birthday.
Cheery, isn't it? 7th of September, Charlotte Theodora Malone. Oh, sod off. It was my great-grandmother's.
It's from the Greek. Means gift of the gods, could be worse.
So there we go.
Yeah, and hopefully you can see some of the contrast that adding all those black flags and things brought into their faces there.
I can imagine how it would have been like if it wasn't there at all. It would have been so overblown out and almost so overly exposed.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, anything else we want to add with this one before we move on to?
Yeah, I'll just quickly mention the grade. Yeah, I got to sit in on the grade for this, which doesn't always happen, unfortunately. In an ideal world, it would as a DP, but sometimes it just doesn't because of budget or schedules. And I must confess, until we got to post, I hadn't thought much about what the look should be in the grade. I don't tend to use custom LUTs lookup tables on set. I tend to just use the standard Rec 709 when I'm filming. And I sort of started doing Google image search to find images, and I went to Leon with several different looks that we could pursue for the grade. And the one he liked was this sort of 60s postcard that I found, this slightly technicolor and slightly saturated look with very strong blues and yellows. Which worked very nicely. And the colorist did a lot of work on the car, because the car was a sort of slightly greenish yellow. And we decided to alter that in post to more of a warmer, slightly orangey yellow to give it a friendlier vibe. So he did that with keying or power mats in every shot that the car appears in, which must have been a huge amount of work for him. But it definitely adds to the mood of the film. I think gives it more of a cheerful, sunny feel.
Definitely. Before we move on to the last little bit involving color grading, I mean, you say it doesn't happen often. But you say it doesn't happen often that you're able to go into post and talk about the color grade or how you have to plan for your color grade or things like picture profiles, etc.
I mean, it's getting better now. Now I'm working on bigger projects and tend to get involved a little bit more. Yeah, I suppose it's about 50-50 now that I get to go and grade. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, but it's definitely good to be, because, you know, your entire work can be destroyed in the grade. Like, I mean, you'd have to have a pretty crazy colorist to want to ruin everything that you've done, because ultimately if the film doesn't look good, they don't look good either. But like, you know, a director and a colorist can choose to take things in an entirely different direction to what you'd imagined. So yeah, it's definitely useful to be there if you can.
It's a future note for all directors out there. Let your cinematographers at least have a look at the grade. So lastly, we have a last little thing left we want to look over, don't we? So do you want to introduce that before we?
Yeah. So this is a short film called Perplex Music. And I don't do a lot of short films anymore, but this one, as you can see, it had quite a decent budget for a short, 28,000. And it had Paul McGann in the lead. So that was, and it was directed by his brother, Mark McGann. So yeah, I was definitely interested to do this. And it's just about a man whose wife has died and how he copes with the grief, really. So very down to earth drama. And again, not a great deal of interiors in the film. You're looking at one of the few interior scenes now, but a lot of it was outdoors. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to use lighting a lot of the time to express the character's emotions. So really looked into what we could do with camera work to give the feeling of grief. So here you can see some behind the scenes pictures. So again, we shot on an Alexa Classic for most of it, but there were just one or two shots that we couldn't do with that camera, where we used, again, a Blackmagic micro cinema camera. Like for this, it was much easier to get a Blackmagic and stick it on a C-stand than to have hired a crane or put up scaffolding to get the Alexa up to that height. So yeah, this is a quick solution for that. this is the mood board. So the director actually did his own mood board, and so I then made this one for myself, drawing some of his shots over and adding some of my own as well. Yeah, just giving ideas of like close-ups on people's eyes and some wide angle frames and things. And the director also did a shot list by himself, which he sent over to me, and we did pretty much work to this, but I found that we were able to combine many of these into single shots just by running the whole scene through and maybe doing a slight camera move or something. I think we were, because I remember the first AD was quite scared when she saw this list because it was quite long given the amount of time we had. So it was good that we were able to combine some shots and get it down a bit.
How often, just before we move on and show you some clips, how often does that, when you have a shot list, how often do you get to the point where you have to either change it, combine it, get rid of shots you really want? How often does that happen, and how do you work around it?
It happens a lot. Yeah, and shots do get dropped, and one of the most difficult things is you actually get as far as filming the shot and then it doesn't make the edit. And often they can be the most beautiful shots. And of course, the editor sees them and goes, well, that's beautiful, but it's not advancing the story, so I'm going to cut that. And they're absolutely right to do it, of course. But yeah, and that's when I hope that I had the forethought to stick that shot on a hard drive of my own so I can still put it on my show reel.
Clever. Keep that in mind, everyone.
Yeah, but no, the shot list always changes, and everyone knows that, right? Because, and I've said it a couple of times already, but when the actors get on set, like everything can change. So you know, I know no first AD worth their salt is going to complain that you've changed the shots because of the blocking, because they know that happens. But it's still useful to have it because the first AD relies on it heavily to schedule the filming day. And you know, the other heads of department will use it to figure out what's going to be seen up close, what's only going to be seen from afar, what might not be seen at all. Yeah, so it's tremendously useful, but yeah, you've got to keep an open mind and realize that it's going to change. There's no point getting attached to anything. Yeah,
just be prepared to be flexible, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I believe we have a clip of the short film.
Yes, so we have a clip. First of all, I think I can probably keep talking over this one because it's got no sound, but the tests, the perplexed music tests. So I had already planned, and we can just play this anytime and I'll keep talking over it. I'd already planned to go into ARRI Rental and do some lens tests just for my own edification. As we were approaching perplexed music, but I decided to do some ISO tests while I was there. And you can see here log on the left and on the right with the Rec 709 LUT. And I'm just comparing the grain in the blacks at different ISOs and looking at skin tones at different ISOs. Quite possibly over the zoom compression, you won't see any difference at all, but there are subtle differences in the full res file you can see. And based on those tests, I decided to shoot most of Perplexed Music at 1600 ISO, which is a stop above the native ISO of the Alexa, because I found I liked the grain. It added a bit of menace and movement in the shadows, which added to the dark feel of the movie. And then these are slow motion tests. I proposed to the director that maybe to give a sense of the man's grief weighing him down, that we should very slightly over crank the camera in some shots, as long as there was no dialogue, of course, so that he would move more slowly and have a bit more weight, like he's moving through treacle almost. So I shot these various different frame rates and I sent this video to the director, and I think based on that, we decided to go for the more subtle 28 and 30 frame ones.
Wonderful. Wow. These are the kind of experiments that we kind of do here in Confetti for some of our students as well. So how often would you encourage to do tests like this before a shoot?
If you're doing anything out of the ordinary, yeah, I would always try to do these tests. And you know, sometimes there's a budget to do that. Sometimes there isn't. You know, there was no budget for me to go into Airy Rental and do this. Fortunately, Airy Rental lets DPs go in and test for free anyway. So it was only my own time I was giving up and a bit of time to edit it. But it was absolutely worth doing. And I've done a couple of tests for the movie I'm prepping at the moment. I've done some tests. I borrowed my flatmate's DSLR and shot a couple of tests here. And I did some things on my iPad even for one particular shot where we're going to do something quite unusual. Yeah, again, it's like you can talk and talk as much as you want, but until you show a director a visual, you often don't really know whether they're going to go for it or not.
Pretty much, have a visual right and ready so they can go, I get what you're trying to say, because you're lucky that some directors might not have that technical know-how. You've been lucky, I think, with having some directors who have that technical know-how, so it makes it a little easier, I guess.
Yeah, well, actually, to be fair, Mark, who directed Perplex Music, and also the director I'm currently working with, are both of them are not technical directors, I would say, and you know, very experienced. Both of them very experienced at working with actors, but not so experienced at camera stuff. And I've found that pretty good actually, because they're very open to ideas that, you know, they want my advice, they want my input, whereas a more technical director often comes in with quite a fixed idea of how they want to do things, so there's less for me to do there. Yeah, but it's you know, just working with a range of directors is always nice, because you know, it's always a different experience.
Wonderful, excellent. I've got a few questions here, so sort of we're reaching the end of our thing. So I've got a few questions I want to throw at you. We've got we have Stephen Hoy, who's got a question here, and he basically says, when you're writing or doing a shot list, would you write it with the editing consideration? So, for example, would you actually already start thinking about how this would be like portrayed in in editing, rather than just here's a bunch of shots, here's everything, or do you consider the edit?
I will be thinking about, because what I'm doing when I'm writing a shot list is I'm basically sitting down imagining the scene in my head. So, and of course that scene in my head is edited as well as filmed. So I am thinking about it, but I wouldn't be sort of writing in my shot list, you know, this shot continues up to line X and then cuts to this and then cuts to that. You know, if there's a camera movement that happens at a certain time, of course I would put that in. And if I feel that it's only worth running a particular angle for part of a scene, I'll put that in. But that's quite rare as well. I mean, one thing I spend a huge amount of time on set telling directors is, can we run the whole scene from this angle? You know, you'll set up a camera angle and they'll go, right, we'll go from line X. And I'll say, hang on a minute, can we just go from the start of the scene? Because I've done so much editing myself, I know how useful it is to have that option of having because there's nothing more annoying as an editor than seeing a wonderful shot and then realizing you can't cut to it at the point you wanted to cut to it because the whole scene wasn't filmed from that angle, only part of it and not the right part. And also getting people to step into frame, that's a huge thing as well. You do a close-up of someone and the director wants to start with them there. You go, hang on a minute, can we just have them step into frame at the start so that the editor's got more options at the cut?
Okay, so basically it's just you really feel that basic coverage is like essential, basically.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. We're slowly reaching the end of all this. Thank you very much for attending. One thing I want to kind of say is, if you've got any piece of advice for any of our students or anything, like a couple of lines or small little bits to pass on your knowledge, what would you give our students?
Wow, I would just say try and make films, like learn from doing it, like just experiment, go out and shoot. You know, I don't know what the deal is with COVID restrictions at the moment, whether you can actually get to equipment and go out and film, but as soon as you're able to, just make as much stuff as you can, because you'll learn so much by doing it, and then by editing it afterwards you'll learn a tremendous amount about what you did right and wrong when you come to edit it and find out whether it cuts together or not. And in terms of getting work, you know, I guess just try and develop relationships with directors, because the vast majority of the time, you know, you'll get hired because the director has worked with you before, or because, you know, you have a meeting and the director likes you, you know. So it's yeah, it's very important to build up those relationships. And some of the people who are your fellow students now hopefully will go on to be successful directors who can hire you. So you know, those are relationships to nurture.
So basically network.
Yeah.
Oh, well, brilliant there. Well, we're gonna wrap it up from there. So thank you, Neil, oh so very much. Thank you for sharing your wonderful insights with us. And once the students are ready to leave, we can have a hold on to have a little bit of a catch up. But I would like to sort of say thank you oh so very much for everyone to attend this this very insightful seminar on cinematography for feature, web series and short film. And thank you very much, and continue on enjoying the rest of Confetti's Industry Week. Thank you very much.